We've got a lot of us. So, hi everyone. Welcome to the Creative Dividend webinar. I'm Andrew Tyndall. I work at System One, the marketing effectiveness data platform. I look after our global partnerships and thought leadership. Mark, do you want to introduce yourself quickly?
Yes, I am. I mean, take your pick from three different failed careers. I'm a former marketing professor. I don't failed at that, but stopped doing that. For a long time, I was a brand consultant for large brands. I've pretty much stopped doing that. And now I'm the founder of the Mini MBA, which I haven't stopped doing. And we've just kicked off class this week. And everything's up and running and everything's working, which is always a relief in week one of the Mini MBA.
Amazing. Right, team, we are going to start. So today we're here to share with you the Creative Dividend, which is some new research from System One and Effie. This is kind of a first look at some serious work we've been doing over the past few years, and what that Mark shared in Cannes. We're going to give you some more of those insights today and touch on a few that Mark's already shared. And then in January, we've got a whole new publication coming out, really looking at this global point of view on effectiveness. So let's get going. To start off this webinar, I asked AI to create a very stressed looking me working late into the night. It put the Excel sheet on the wrong side of the laptop, and a Red Bull looks like it's about to go nuclear. So I don't think any creatives on the call need to worry about AI. But why have I got these two pictures up? Over the past 2 years, me and my amazing team at System One have been working with Effie worldwide to turn their incredible case library into a modern view on effectiveness, connecting it to System One's data to understand how creativity impacts in market effects globally. And you can see on the right, looking a little bit more glamorous than me at my desk, is Mark, who actually took this data and shared, as he does in his iconic fashion, to thousands of adoring fans at Cannes, the first kind of insights. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to share some more insights that have not been really shared before at Cannes. Mark is going to retouch on a few of the key principles that he thinks he's found from the data, and then we're going to go into a Q&A. And no questions are off. You can really ask anything you want, and we'll spend about 20 minutes answering questions. And because we're still writing the final publication, if you want to see anything specific from the data, fire it over and we'll explore that, and it might make it into the end publication. But today's not about me and Mark. It's about Effie and System One. So Effie is a global benchmark of effectiveness. There are global effectiveness awards. And we've been working with them globally over the past few years, as I said. And System One is the is a marketing effectiveness data platform that explores brand tracking, innovation testing, and also creative measurement. Let's have a look at these two very unique data sets, because it's the first time that something like this has been done and combined, starting with System One. So System One measure the emotional and brand reaction to advertising to predict and understand and improve how it performs in market. And we create our predictive measurements, our star, spike, and fluency rating with that. But what we also do, John Evans, our incredible CMO, made the crazy decision a few years ago to start testing every piece of UK and US TV advertising as it goes live, which meant that we had already a load of the Effie Case Library ads already tested with hundreds of thousands of people, so we can really lean into this research. But we don't just test TV advertising as it goes live. We do pre-testing for our private clients, and we don't just measure the emotional response. We understand why people feel like that. There's a rich history and a broad spectrum of emotion, which Mark will be touching on that we track. We also measure what associations are built by advertising and whether it's entertaining or rational. And I'll be amiss to mention that we don't just do testing when it's live. We pre-test early stage testing for a lot of our clients across the whole media mix. So we're able to bring this fantastic, rich, consumer focused data set on creativity, not marketers' opinions, actual consumer data, and match it for the first time to an effectiveness case database in market. And that's with the Effie. So Effie data, we've been looking at US, UK, Ireland, and European case studies, which represent over nearly 140 billion pounds worth of market share. But what do we actually get from this data, and what's Mark going to be talking about, and what can we actually get from it. So we had a team of effectiveness experts reading over 1,000 marketing case studies from across 15 years. And we can really look at what marketing actually achieves in market. And we call these business results: revenue, profit, market share, gain, Byron Sharp's favorite thing, new customers, penetration, a reduction in price sensitivity, because marketing has to shift actual business results in market. What we can also look at is the intermediary results that marketing achieves to change the results of businesses in market. So that's brand effects that last. We've got awareness and salience, image and equity, and the famous differentiation versus distinctiveness. But we can also look at my favorite thing at the moment, and that's short-termism. We can look at whether these campaigns over the past 15 years globally have been pushing for short-term outcomes and tracking short-term outcomes. We call these short-term objectives: engagements, clicks, conversions, impressions, this kind of thing, traffic. Basically, the stuff on your left is what your CFO will care about. The stuff you can report in market to change shareholder value, essentially. In the middle, we've got the stuff that marketers can change behavior and track via their brand effects. And on the right, we've got the stuff that we focus a little bit too much on these days, which me and Mark are going to talk about over the next half an hour. But let's have a taste of what the Effie, this amazing effectiveness data bank that we've built, can really share with us. We can see that business results are really what marketing should be pushing for and what the best Effie case studies and campaigns really achieved. We can see that when marketing achieves more of these things, we actually gain market share and we create more incremental profit, which is drastically different to these short-term objectives. We found that these campaigns in the Effie Case Library, the more short-term objectives they were focused on, the less likely they were to report share gain and incremental profit. So what we're going to be talking about is achieving business results, because that actually is what grows businesses in market. We won't be talking about short-term objectives and achieving these short-term results over the next half hour. But next, I have some very bad news, because we've all been very naughty marketers. Naughty, naughty marketers. We've been spending more and more on advertising over the past decade or so. Even when you kind of take in inflation and attribute inflation, we can see that over this time period, this isn't Effie data, this is data I've pulled from elsewhere, that we've spent 30% more on advertising generally globally over this time period. Now, as a marketing community, do we really think that we've spent 30% more and we're seeing 30% more effects? Are we actually growing brands more and more? I don't really think so. I think we've all got that hunch and that feeling that that's not true. But again, from this incredible effectiveness data bank that we've built with Effie, we can see that that's actually true. We can see some data, put some data to it. Advertising has never done less, really. If we look at the average number of brand effects built by these campaigns globally, 140 billion pounds worth of market share, this huge data set, we can see that advertising has become less able to grow brands as we've spent more on it. It's worth considering why this is. So I'll have to consult the Chief Innovation Officer of System 1, Orlando Wood, who's been researching advertising for the past decade. He's actually launched a new course called Advertising Principles Explained, APE, where the next cohort is starting in a few weeks. His research actually looks at whether advertising is able to put on a show and entertain versus salesmanship, rationally grasping at a sale. And he's shown that actually advertising has become less able to put on a show. And he attributes that to this decline in brand building. We can also see another effect here, where because we've been able to marry this System 1 consumer-focused creative measurement with this effectiveness data bank for the first time, we can see that advertising has become less emotional. And these two data points are really well correlated. The average star rating year on year of these campaigns has been decreasing, and we've seen advertising less and less able to build brand. But you might also think that this decrease in brand building is because humans are less able to focus. We've got less and less attention these days. That's not necessarily true. Our attention volume as human beings has been built on millions of years of evolution, sorry. And there's great data showing that we're still able to hold the same amount of attention that we've always been able to do. But what is true is that we see more and more ads these days. It's not that crazy figure you see people throwing around, 10,000 ads a day. From my research over this period, we can actually see that we see about 600 ads back then a day, and we've moved to seeing about 1.2 thousand these days. So we've seen a double in ad stock, and our attention volume is held flat. So we're getting our attention split more and more. And finally, you can see it in these iconic pictures. We've moved towards digital media, haven't we? You can actually see digital media here has been rising over this time period. This is the global revenue of Meta, a great barometer of how we've moved towards digital. Now, I'm not saying this move towards digital and Meta's ad revenue is causing this, but what's really interesting is that we've become more short-termistic over this time frame, as digital media has allowed us to measure our advertising in days, hours, and minutes. It's allowed us to become more short-term. These two data sets are almost perfectly correlated. So we're seeing advertising becoming less able to put on a show, as Orlando Wood says. We're seeing it becoming less emotional. We're seeing short-termism on the rise and brand building on the fall as we spend more and more on advertising. But does brand building matter? Do we still need to focus on brand building? Well, we can actually, again, look at this incredible effectiveness data set. And we can see that campaigns that don't build brand, this bottom quartile in pink here, sure, they're still creating these brilliant business results. But when we look at brand building campaigns, those campaigns that still manage to create this awareness, trust, salience, differentiation, and distinctiveness in this era of efficiency, we can see that these campaigns actually build more brand effects, business results, sorry, but importantly, they compound over time. They create more and more profit, market share, and penetration. The next obvious thing to ask ourselves from this great data is, how do we build more brand and business effects from our advertising? And there's two routes we can go down, right? We can go down media or creative with advertising. Let's take a quite quick look at the media angle, because I think it really shows how important and interesting this global effectiveness data bank is that we've built, being able to answer these kind of questions. We can look at what campaigns use in terms of consumer touch points, the media channels they used. We can look here at whether they were used in a campaign and they led to more brand building, more brand effects. On the right, we've got these kind of touch points that create more future demand potential, those ones that create more brand effects. We can look at this versus that short term, the long and the short. We can look at whether campaigns which include these consumer touch points, whether they were able to create more incremental revenue in the short term. We call this whether a consumer touch point has got more demand conversion potential, whether it can create revenue in the short term. Well, let's have a look at all these incredible consumer touch points that we're using globally. I think this is really interesting data. Let's have a look at a few of them. It's great to see that radio is slap bang in the middle with podcasting, that radio is famously a dual action channel, we call it. It's great at building brand, but also converting demand. Don't listen to people saying TV is dead. TV is far on the right here. It's got great brand, long-term building potential. What's really interesting, I think, on the far right is creators. We actually found, and this is quite surprising in the data, I think, that including creators in a campaign is a really great way at building that future long-term demand. We're going to see more and more of this over the next coming years, showing how creators are really powerful. But what's a bit of a caveat with creators is we've found with our research with TikTok recently, in this new publication we've launched called The Long and the Short Form of It, there's quite a variance in creative quality with creators. So we can really get really small effects and really large effects based on how great these creators are at creating their ads. And finally, I'll invite my legally safe pink superhero on to introduce super touch points. These channels in pink, this idea that I've stolen from Ian Gibbs, who works at the DMA and Jitmail in the UK. These campaigns, these channels, in pink, book this trend where if a channel is better at building future demand, it's worse at converting current demand. They do over and above both really well. And what's really interesting is we see our traditional channels sitting in here, right? Out of home, radio, direct physical mail, TV, PR. These are really still working hard in this kind of digital era of efficiency. But media choices and consumer touch points aren't the only way we can change our brand outcomes, are they, Mark? So I will pass over to Mark so he can share what he found with the research.
Thank you, Andrew. Hello, everyone. Yeah, so let me take you back through the analysis that I've done. So on Andrew's data, I should hasten to add. So if you go back through the sort of standard theories of marketing, you know, if you've got even a rudimentary training in marketing, you'll know all these three things, right? These different concepts. There are certain models and concepts you're aware of. There's Durgelet, there's something to do with excess share of voice, there's the brand relationship spectrum, there's the long and the short of it, there's Arca's brand equity model, there's something to do with the funnel and the 95-5 rule. There's always that stupid plane, which I've never really accepted to be true. There's the model of there's the model of Neil McElroy's brand management suggestion of how to build brand managers from Procter & Gamble in 1934. There's Paul Dyson's very intriguing chart that looks at advertising profitability. There's obviously the work on the 4Ps going back to 1960. There's Romanyuk's distinctive asset grid. That's they're the main models, right? The greatest hits of marketing. I want to zoom in though on Paul Dyson's famous model of advertising profitability. You've almost certainly seen this, right? So the idea behind it is Paul is a very talented statistician, has used various different techniques to break up all the different elements of advertising to say which of these have the most potential to make your advertising drive your profitability more. And in the original research that goes back about 20 years, you can see that the brand's existing market size was the biggest profit multiplier. And then he updated it, I think, a couple of times. Yeah, there we go. Pretty much with the same message, right? This is the latest version from a couple of years ago. And what you see here is, yeah, the brand size is the biggest profit multiplier times 20. But the thing we're interested in here is that second item, to Andrew's point, which is creative quality. So this chart is often pulled out by creative agencies to say you can't do a lot about brand size, at least in the short term. So that number two factor there of creative quality, is your ad any good? Does it have good creative? Is the most important factor we can control in terms of your advertising. And it has an up to 12 times multiplier effect if you have a good ad. And it's normally expressed something like this, you know, creativity is the biggest multiplier. And at places like Cannes, everybody gets a bit hot and sweaty about this. You know what I mean? Like, ooh, yeah, creativity is important. Yeah, you know. How did the great Paul Dyson work this out, this factor of 12? Well, again, it's a very elegant, very basic piece of research. He went through various campaigns, let's say the oldie campaigns with Kevin the Carrot, and he looked at their impact. And he looked at the worst of the executions to the best of the executions. In this case, there's a 3 times multiple. The best ad in the collection, the best creative, is 3 times more effective than the worst. And then he looked at dozens of other campaigns to look at what the range was. And the range ended up being 12, meaning the most extreme range between the worst ad and the best ad gave you a 12 times multiple. Hence the fact that good creative can be 12 times better than massively shithouse creative. That's where the data comes from. And, you know, it's a nice little rubric. The point I've always made about this data is it doesn't really tell us how do I get a 12 or an 11 rather than a 1 for my creative. What behooves a stronger creative score? And so then when Andrew originally told me about his data set, I said to him, the thing I'd be interested in is kind of boiling it down to what gets me a 12 rather than a 1. Like what are the keys? And so we've got the data, and you know, I'm going to present it in the next 10 minutes. It's not complicated stuff, but that doesn't mean it's not very useful for you. I'm going to talk about 3 things. I'm going to talk about emotion, I'm going to talk about fluency, and I'm going to talk about time. Okay? Let's start with emotion. So when I say emotion, you think about babies, or you think about puppies, or you think about puppies dressed up as babies, or maybe babies dressed up as puppies. We tend to have this kind of maudlin view of emotion. It's, oh, isn't that, oh, it's lovely. It's lovely. We kind of miss the point. And the point of emotion is you've got these massive wanging wheels of hot buttons you can press that all will create an emotional response among the target market. And some of it's negative. It doesn't mean it will have a negative effect. The negative emotion may not have a negative effect on your market. So I've picked a few here. Let's make the consumer feel something, anything. Make him feel anxious, make him feel proud, make him feel revolted for a while within the context of a 30-second ad. And that emotional response will create effects. Let me give you a nice example now. This is a beautiful ad. I'm just going to let it play out. It's one that scores relatively highly on emotion, I would suggest. Let me play it to you. Now. It's a nice little ad, right? And the point of the emotion there, as you can see using the System 1 data, courtesy of Andrew, is there's a little bit of surprise, there's a little bit of happiness there. It actually is generating a significant emotional response from the market throughout that ad. And the point of those emotional responses is they do produce better results. So if we go ahead and look at all the campaigns that have been studied in the data set, and we look at the bottom quarter versus the top quarter for emotional response, what we see, no surprise, is that those that are more emotional have a significantly higher proportion of brand effects. That data carries nicely across also to business effects, which we should be even more interested in many ways. Again, the bottom quarter compared to the top quarter on emotion, again, we see a significant effect. Emotion drives effects. One interesting thing that comes out of the data is if you look at broad targeting and low emotion, it certainly is trumped by narrow targeted high emotion campaigns. But if you really want to maximize the emotional charge and impact, as you can see, you really want to go with that sophisticated mass marketing approach multiplied by a high emotional charge. That's the sweet spot here over time for achieving the biggest overall impact, in this case for reporting of profit. So we need a bit of emotion, right? An emotion will work very nicely. But how many of you were actually aware that this campaign was for Wynn Casinos? Because I feel like, although this is an emotional ad, it's not a particularly well branded or fluent campaign. So did you know it was for Wynn or not? Did you remember that? And I'd be surprised if you did, because it wasn't for Wynn at all. It was for the fucking Bellagio, right? But my point is, it's not very well branded. And that's our second point. So it's awesome to get all this emotional response out of the market. But the first rule of brand management is first they must know that it's me. You can see from the System 1 data and that piss poor amount of pink and the dominantly large amount of black here, which is branded recognition across the ad, most people didn't know right up till the end who the ad was for. And that sounds obvious, but it's a very, very common error. So none of this emotional stuff matters if we don't have, and I will enlarge myself here in an appropriate fashion, none of this matters if we don't have one of four different words that mean the same thing: fluency, distinctiveness, codification, and branding. They all do mean the same thing, by the way. We've got a bit messy in our discipline. It's nobody's fault, but we're talking about the same thing here. Do people attribute the ad to the brand? Whatever you want to call it. If you look at brands that have low emotion versus those with high emotion, as we've already seen, there's a significant increase in brand effects. But you lose all of it if you don't have strongly branded material. So we have this wonderful emotional journey, but it's not heavily branded or codified. You basically lose it all. So emotion on its own is not enough. Emotion multiplied by branding is what we want. And for that, we need to head over and have a look at Twix, who know exactly how to do it.
It doesn't matter if you choose left or right because they're both chewy, crunchy, and delicious.
You know, it doesn't matter if you choose left or right because they're both chewy, crunchy, and delicious.
Know what else I like? No, what?
The sound of the snap when you bite into it.
So I picked that ad for a couple of reasons, right? First of all, it has, again, this lovely emotional response. Note a little bit more now of disgust and anger, and perhaps horror if we'd included it in the measurement. But unlike our ad for the Bellagio, what you see down here is the fluency trace that System 1 do, peaking around about this point and pretty much filling the cup. By the end of it, everyone knows this is Twix. And everyone knows this is Twix because although that ad is very emotional and it's funny and it's horrific and everything else, it's also imbued with a shit ton of brand codes for Twix. And we see that in the data, right? So first, you've got a very strong star rating. It's emotional. That's great. We've seen that already. But also the fluency rating here is essentially 100, which is exceptional. By the end of it, everybody knows that this is Twix. Why do they know it's Twix? Well, it's full of what I would call brand codes, what Professor Sharp would call distinctive brand assets, what System 1 would call fluent devices. Again, they all mean the same thing. If you want to increase the branded potential of your advertising, you need to use the right codes. And some codes are more powerful than others. So we'll start with the symbol as the sort of index score of 1.0. Celebrities can, and obviously it depends on the celebrity, work better. Brand colors at the same level. Then we get to slogans. Then we get to typefaces, which perform surprisingly well. The distinct product shape and jingles. Then we get to our fluent device character, which is kind of, almost the ultimate. And finally, a sonic device, not just a jingle, but a da-dum. Again, don't underestimate here the power of the auditory cue. And also, we haven't got them here, but also smells and touch play a role as well. We tend to overstate the visual characteristics. But nonetheless, you see my point. The right codes can generate that branded nature that's often missing from advertising. But this is something new, and I'm rather excited about it. We've known for a while, going back, that some codes are better than others on average at generating distinctiveness. But this is a very lovely piece of research from Andrew's data. The number of codes shown in the ad. So they don't have to be different codes. You could show the Twix logo twice or three times, for example, in that ad. But how many times do you have to show a code in order to have the highest level of fluency, or in this case, brand recall? Well, the interesting answer is 7 is the magic number, because you can see that leap from 6 to 7. And the nice thing about having a data set of 12,000 ads is, and I haven't checked this, but that's probably a statistically significant finding, yeah? 7 is the magic number. Now, you've got to weave them in there, of course, and they can be codes that are repeated. You should never have 7 codes. It's too many. But if you can get 7 codes into these ads, the likelihood in your brand recall, which I would argue is the most important factor of all, is going to go through the roof. And I find that fascinating, right? Because it sets up a really interesting dualism between how you build your palette of codes for your brand and then how you apply them, which is rather different. So picking codes is a careful business. You've got to be choiceful. in which ones you use and which ones you don't. In contrast, the way you use the codes, you can be quite vulgar. Get them out, use them. And rather than being choiceful, as you see, we need 7 of them in 30 seconds. We've got to be quite incessant. The palette of code should be tight. I mean, my rule has always been, and Jenny Romaniuk will shoot me for saying it, logo plus 3. You need to be choiceful and focused, right? But the application of codes can be playful and transgressive and fun. The palette of codes, you can absolutely have too many, and it weakens the distinctiveness. But when it comes to applying codes, you really can't overdo it. 7 is a big number. You want to put them everywhere. And I think this tension's quite interesting. In summary, logo plus 3, 7 codes per ad. And I think this is very basic, but very, very important research. So let's capture that in a nutshell. So what we're saying is, if you don't have emotional campaigns, you're pretty much fucked in a sort of effectiveness perspective, yeah? If you add emotion, you instantly see this spectacular charge overall in the ability of a campaign to generate incremental profit. And if we can add that fluency, that codification, that distinctiveness to the emotion, we see another step leap up, as we saw with the Twix campaign. But here we glimpse our third factor, yeah? Because you'll notice here that the impact of having emotion and fluency varies over time. So to begin with, if your campaign is under 6 months, the value of having fluency and emotion present in ads is a multiple of 4 over, not emotional campaigns. It's good. But if you keep that same campaign in market for more than 6 months, we get more. And if we keep it for a whopping 3 years, which does emerge like 7 codes as kind of the target number, you see that value of fluency and emotion jump up to a whopping 7.5 multiple over non-emotional, non-fluent campaigns. So my third variable is time. Yeah, we have been baking our cakes not long enough in the advertising world over the last 10 or 15 years. What we want is the same ad, at the very least, an ad within the same campaign theme over more than 3 years to fully get the maximal value of what we're doing. Now, of course, nobody does that. Everyone is in love with the pornography of change. And what I mean by that is marketers that are obsessed with change. Andrew's already mentioned it, attention spans. I get this question about every 4 or 5 days, literally. Someone will say to me, in a world where attention spans are much less than they used to be, in a world where all the existing rules of marketing have totally changed, in an unprecedented period of change for marketing, and then they ask some dumbass question, they get themselves in this hot, sweaty lather of everything's going to change. And it affects advertising too. The minute most companies have created their advertising, they're starting to think about how they're going to change it and how they're going to beat it and what they're going to do next. It's the wrong approach. The 3-year marker, provided you've got good work out there, should be the guidance here. And Andrew's done this very nice work on compound creativity when he looks at companies that are more consistent over time. And what he means by that is same agency, same distinctive assets, same creative, same media, same everything, right? He divides up companies into 4 quartiles. If you look at those quartiles and how they perform based on how consistent they are over time, applying his score, again, the results are spectacular. The average ROI from that top quartile of companies that are more consistent and don't fall for the pornography of change is spectacularly stronger. Yeah, the percentage of campaigns achieving incremental profit bigger as well. So the point about time needs to be added to this list as well. So to illustrate the point, I have a massive, effectiveness attraction to KitKat. I think it is the greatest, not the greatest brand, but probably the best branded brand in the history of consumer goods. It's a big call, but I think it's true. And if you want to see that combination in play of emotion, codification, fluency, but also time, you've got to look at KitKat, which for half a century has been essentially running the same ad. So let's enjoy what this all points to and what real success looks like.
Just going for a break.
I want to break free.
Oh, hey, just the man I'm
just going for a break.
I want to break free. God knows. God knows I want to break free. But life still goes on. I can't
Have a break. Have a KitKat.
So there you have it, right? You see all that juicy emotion up there from a decent agency doing a great job. You see clearly codification, the presence of, in this case, actually 8 distinctive assets. And you also see the benefit of effectively running the same campaign for 50 years about having a break, having a KitKat, and what it does when the brand actually appears. This is, best practice in a nutshell. So, and again, we see it played out in the data, very strong star rating for the emotion, incredible fluency rating, and doing the same thing over and over again. So I make no apologies for how simple my take on this wonderful data is. I think it teaches you 3 very basic lessons, yeah? The first lesson, which I think is, crucial, is emotion. So, it's very easy to take our products too seriously. It's a serious business, marketing, and we forget the inherent emotion and stretching out the emotional options from the wheel. Second, amazingly, most marketers are not codifying their advertising enough. Now, that sounds weird because you'd think it would be obvious. I've spent a lot of time looking into this. The reason why companies are not codifying their ads enough is because they are thinking that the consumer pays the same amount of attention to the ad that they do. Yeah. So these subtle, these beautiful, subtle 30-second little mini Oscar movies that reveal at the end, who could it be? Who could it be? Oh, it's us. And everyone thinks everyone's entranced by that. Most consumers aren't paying enough attention to get that. So I think it's a challenge of market orientation to realize most consumers don't give a shit about your brand or your ads, and they're not really paying attention. If you could see it that way, I think you would grasp it. I'll tell you as an aside, a very interesting example of this. About 25 years ago, I used to write the back page of British Airways Business Magazine, their weekly case study. It was my introduction to writing when I was a professor at London Business School. So I'd write the back page of the in-flight magazine, and I would fly everywhere when I was in London. So I'd always see around me in business class 25 people all going through the magazine and all experiencing my article, and I could watch them, experiencing it in the wild. And it was one of the great lessons in how to write a column, because almost everyone got to the back, opened the page of my column, and then put it down almost immediately. It's a lesson that I think advertisers could get as well. Most people don't care and they don't pay attention, and you need those 7 codes to be successful. And finally, time. We need to be more patient. We need to bake our advertising cakes for longer. The 3-year marker appears to be pretty standard across this data. There's a little bit of gray there. Is it the same ad for 3 years? Why not? Or in some cases, is it a campaign that stretches across 3 or more years using the same motifs and storytelling with slightly different executions? Either way, most companies just don't pass that test, and they're doing too much, spreading themselves too thin, and they're not allowing their cakes to bake for long enough. Okay, a final plug for Andrew's data set. I've done a very simplistic job of it. It's available here. And if you take a photograph of this or do a scan, you can access the whole document for free. And I would be rude, before I finish, not also promoting the mini MBA, which has now started, so you can't do it. But you could join for next April, when the next time we run the course. Okay, promo's over. I'm now going to hand it back to Andrew in the studio, and we're going to answer some questions.
The Q&A. Thanks, Mark. We've got a lot of questions. So now we've got kind of 15, 20 minutes. If you shoot over your questions, and and also your ideas of what you want us to explore from the data. Ask anything. Me and Mark will try and answer. There's a lot of questions. I've tried to scroll down a few, Mark. Let's try go for a few of these. B2B, do you reckon it's different for B2B, Mark? My point of view on this is there's a lot of B2B data in this data set. I've seen no evidence why it's any different for B2B. If you look at the LinkedIn B2B Institute, which has got incredible data reproving this stuff, I don't think it's any different for B2B. But also we're exploring kind of vertical cuts in this full publication we're releasing in January, which will go down into that detail. But Matt, do you think there's any evidence that this is different for B2B?
Zero difference, Andrew. And we've got to stop asking this question because it's stupid. Yeah, it makes no sense, right? So it's the question: is it the same for B2B? Which I understand why people ask it from a B2B point of view, but look what you're doing. You're going right. There's B2B here, and that's different from B2C. Look at B2C. Yeah, look at the B2C thing you're saying is all similar, right? In that, there's trombones, sex tools, ice cream, insurance, banking, pet products, you know, a billion different things all being sold. None of them are the same. Neither is this. So you're setting up a false paradigm. So I'll bet you when Andrew gets the data, we'll discover, what do you know? It works just as well in B2B. And to be fair, we look at the B2B Marketing Institute's work at LinkedIn, which is excellent work. It usually finds that the impacts are more pronounced in B2B than B2C.
Yeah, we saw that in the LinkedIn B2B Institute data, didn't we, with emotion. People ask about the QR code because Mark's head was in the way. We will just email out the links to the mini MBA and the creative dividend for people to get, so don't worry about the QR code. People are very interested in that media chart that I shared, the touch points, and how it could be misinterpreted and stuff like this, which I think is, fair. So what that chart looks at is the potential for these different touch points to lead to long and short-term effects. But if you're more interested in this, I'd encourage you to go look at some research. I know Mark's are as well, Profitability 2.0 by Essence MediaCom, that actually looks at a much more detailed look at media channels through the lens of scale, efficiency, and payback. And you actually see, interestingly, that TV is still the large majority of the profit created in the UK. So you actually reconfirm a lot that TV is still an amazing channel. Another one people are asking is about small versus large brands. So if you actually go and download the full research, we go into this already, actually. We found that it's more important for challenger brands to be more emotional. And we found that it's a bit of a competitive advantage for challenger brands because the ceiling's so much higher for them. They don't have that awareness, that differentiation already. So if a challenger brand, and they often don't, a lot of small brands go straight for D2C, rational, sell. If they make an emotional campaign, we actually see they create more brand effects in these large brands. I think that is how you have a chance at catching up category leaders.
We've
Mark,
seen
what
that.
do you reckon?
Yeah, we've seen that a lot. It's a recurring finding now, right? So again, look, don't overstate the difference between small and big brands. I mean, there are a few, but it's not that big. Most of it's the same. But the one big difference we've seen across a number of different studies is if you take this challenge of distinctiveness and differentiation, it's clear that smaller brands, challenger brands, need to over-index more initially on differentiation. And it's only later on with maturity that distinctiveness becomes a better play. So that ties in with Andrew's point here, which is emotion and driving differentiation is probably an even better play for smaller brands. It doesn't mean the bigger brands shouldn't do it, but it certainly makes sense for smaller brands who, again, to Andrew's point, go, oh, I don't have much budget. I've just got to put all of it into performance. You couldn't do anything more stupid.
Agreed. We also are getting questions about rage baiting. I think it's because you did a recent podcast with John Evans on the Uncensored CMO podcast that I think was released this week. Everyone should go listen to that. Mark, I know you started a new
What was rage baiting? What was rage baiting me? I don't even know what that
rage baiting
means.
is that I think we're talking about the Sydney Sweeney campaign, which I wanted to ignore for this webinar.
Oh, yes.
But I know you've started a new column in the Drum and Adweek. Do you want to just summarize what you've shared on what you think about this, Mark?
I think I got it right. I wrote a column for Adweek. I think I got it a little bit wrong, right? But yeah, basically we were talking about, I got a lot of abuse when I said that the Sydney Sweeney ad didn't seem to be that good. It was all right, but just all right. And then you guys came out with some data showing that it was, basically okay, slightly under average ad. For everyone else, if you were a left-wing nutcase, it was examples of eugenics and racism. And if you were a right-wing nutcase, it was proof that woke advertising was over and we're going back to the 1970s. Neither of which were true. What people were doing was seeing what they wanted to see in an ad, which is the definition of stupidity. Nobody cares what you see in the ad. The only thing that matters is what does the target market see in the ad. And very interestingly, what the target market, Gen Z American women, saw in that ad was mostly a rather kind of boring, mundane ad. I do think, however, the extra publicity, and we talked about it last week, Andrew, the extra publicity it generated did drive some significant additional sales. I do think the company is overstating the power of that ad too. I think it was average, and I think that's a very unpopular point of view with pretty much everyone.
I can see the chat blowing up as you're saying that, so I'm going to skip on to the next question.
The Sydney Sweeney thing will never end.
Good Lord. Next question I found really interesting, actually. You get this with a lot of questions from the IPA's data as well. Is this a robust data set to judge marketing from? Now, we've tried really hard with the Effie data, and it's really impressive stuff. We pushed to make sure that we're not just looking at Effie winners. We got entrance data from there as well. So there's good campaigns and bad campaigns. 50% of the Effie Case Library is the lead channel that they use was actually digital. So it's not just TV-centric campaigns, and it's global. And as we've talked about, small and large brands. So I actually think we've tried really hard over the past few years, System One and Effie, to build something really robust to answer everyone's questions from all kind of angles. But when we release the full thing in January, we'll be going into more detail so you can explore that. The spray and pray approach, people have been asking about why do we see, as we know all these different consumer touch points work in different ways, why are we still smattering all our campaigns across channels? And is that the wrong thing to be doing, Mark? What do you reckon?
No, I think it comes back to another piece of data in the Paul Dyson study and also from other research sources too. When you spread your money across different tools, you pick, obviously you're breaking your scale resources. So rather than putting all your money into Meta, the minute you do Meta and radio, you've just kind of reduced scale efficiency perhaps. But what you get in return, which is normally an incremental win, is you get these synergy and diversity effects that we see play out again and again. If you can create a campaign which goes across multiple media, maybe because of unduplicated reach, maybe because of synergy effects, we don't know, but it certainly seems to produce much more significant effects. So how many channels is an interesting question. I've always adopted the viewpoint that provided you can afford a relatively impactful investment, the more the merrier. I think Peter and Les pulled it back to 4 or 5. But the point is, you don't want to just spend all your money on one horse. You really, when it comes to media channels, do want to spread your money across multiple channels in a coherent way.
I think on this, there's a lot of data that shows like more channels, more effects, but I think it's kind of misleading. Like I was trained at Diageo and like business school. You go for like the top of the S curve on a channel, as you said. You achieve that's just standard media planning. You get your reach and reach efficiency, and then you start thinking about other. And
then you move on to the next tool.
But I think a lot of the times we assume we need to go for 10 these days, and you never reach scale and efficiency in one channel. And the other thing we found, right, with the compound creativity research is that if you are doing more channels, you need to be consistent across them. Channels don't work in isolation. They layer memories together.
Yeah, it's fair. It's fair.
The Bellagio campaign, there's a question about, is this because at one point we thought we needed to hook people in with a story and then kind of shock them with a brand at the end?
I think it's because people who work in creativity and advertising agencies really want to be Tarantino, right? They don't want to make ads at all. What they want to do is surprise and entertain and delight people in an artistic fashion, which isn't the purpose of advertising at all. Do you know what I mean? Oh, who knew it was, it's an ad for KFC. That's a surprise, So I think, it's a fundamental miscomprehension of how advertising works. Look at how agencies review ads. They literally look at every pixel. look at how the consumers look at ads, and they're pissed, they're half asleep, they're driving a car. You know what I mean? They're
Hopefully they're not
thinking,
driving a car.
hopefully not a car, but well, they could be if it's a radio ad, right? You know what I mean? But they're not.
True.
They're not. You know, I'm not just talking about TV, but my point is, the way advertising is consumed versus the way it's created could not be more different. And so
Yeah.
what we're seeing is, people, auteurs having a vision for their creative films, which contrasts with how consumers actually experience it.
Yeah, I think the media landscape has changed right as well. Most TV ads are like, they're listened to. We're sat on our phone and our laptops on the couch, and our attention is fleeting. So I think the world of end framing, it might have worked like 5 or 10 years ago, where we had stronger, more active attention, and people like Karen Nelson-Field and Lumen have proven this. But we've moved on to more separated attention. So I always advise clients, we see it at System 1, where if we omni-brand an ad early and often with a character or a jingle. So if you're tuning in and out, even if you tune in the middle of an ad, you get that brand recognition. I think that is best practice now. And it gives creatives a really nice brief. Like, this is how the world is now. How do we still create emotion whilst doing this? I think you've got great examples like with Kevin the Carrot at Christmas. No matter if you're not watching or if you tune in halfway through, that's an Aldi ad, for example. Same with Geico Gecko in America.
But I would say that rule of 7 that your data produced is probably the one big thing to pull out of it all, right? Which is, if I was a relatively ambitious brand manager, I would have many years ago when I was working for Louis Vuitton, we used to talk about Hermes, and it was like they had a checklist for their ads because they always seemed to produce the brand codes throughout the ad. And I gave a talk somewhere in China about it, saying it's almost like Hermes have a checklist. And the woman that ran Hermes in the region came up to me and says, "It's not almost like it. That's what we've got. We have a checklist, right?" I almost think
by their computer.
Yeah, and I almost think that we should, a good brand manager or CMO should institute that number and say, right, it's not rocket science, right? Unless I can spy 7 of our agreed distinctive brand assets in your 30-second TVC, you're not going to get any media money. Why wouldn't you do that? I mean, it doesn't, it doesn't make sense not to do that, right? Based on your data.
Yeah, I mean, we were working with a client recently, right? And we were looking at them versus a competitor, and the competitor had like a whole mix: character, color, font, audio. And then this client we were working on was kind of branding later on. And often it's the easiest fix you can do. As you said, I actually think brand recall on an ad is such an easy lift. Like, get a broader palette of brand assets, like Jenny Romanak at the Edinburgh Bass Institute always says, and just use them regularly and often.
Yeah, it's 2 things there, though, right? There's having, like I was trying to talk about in my part, there's the discipline to create a tight palette, which shouldn't be there shouldn't be too many things there. And then there's the freedom to kind of, apply them over and over and over again in everything you do. They're 2 very different skills.
Yeah. Someone spotted that pack was on the top right of that kind of touch points chart, actually advertising your pack. And does that mean that we shouldn't be changing our pack? I mean, I wrote about this in my column. I write about this every month in my column on this. Like, I think we should be trying to leave our packs alone. Like, I think we should have really strong evidence of why you should ever change versus strong evidence of why we shouldn't change. We should be flipping the script on that. And you wrote about, I think someone was changing their tagline. You launched a craps initiative, didn't you, Mark?
Oh, I did. Yeah. Oh, yeah, this is true. You're reminding me of my own shit now. Yeah, last week I wrote another column for The Drum about basically John Lewis got rid of Never Knowingly Undersold after sort of 96 years. Then after 2 years went, oh, fuck, that was a mistake. Brought it back and then had the cheek to celebrate the anniversary of it last week, even though they killed it for a couple of years. But it produced a really nice list of all the companies that were dumb enough to change their slogan and then, of course, change back. And you know this from your own client experience, which you cannot comment on. One of the most delicious moments when you sit with clients looking at test data is they've pulled their slogan 3, 4, 6, 10 years earlier, and all they get back from their ad testing is No one really remembered anything other than the slogan, which you pulled 8 years ago and wasn't even featured in the ad, right? That's the moment when they all know how stupid they are. So yeah,
Yeah.
packs, slogans,
Jingles.
jingles, man. You know, you don't want to mess with them too much, right? Again, we come back to the pornography of change, you know. And I'd like to do a shout out to the Hilton if I can. The stupidest decision in the history of marketing, right? They had the slogan of all time, which is "Take me to the Hilton," and they turned it into, let me get this exactly right: "Travel should take you places," right? What WTF? Do you know what I mean? Like there are tragedies there that we should, that we should always remember. Anyway, we should move on.
We've got we've got a few questions asking about emotion and whether positive and negative changes effects.
Ah, this is great.
This
Yeah,
is a great question.
let me cue it up because I think you have the answer and I don't, right? I've had this question for a while too, which is, do we always necessarily over connote positive emotion with positive results? I would argue that a lot of the time, if I can scare the shit out of a viewer or I can enrage them, that emotional response is very useful. How does System One? I know you've got limitations to this, right, in terms of measurement. But what would the System One data tell you on this?
Yeah, so I mean, Orlando did this kind of work originally when he was kind of building our star rating with the IPA data, and then I've seen it again in the Effie data. So first off, dull is the enemy, neutrality, and that we've seen that with research with the cost of dull with John Evans, Peter Field, and Adam Morgan that launched it.
Can I add that we also saw it with the Sydney Sweeney campaign? But carry on. I just want to mention that again.
Well, the enemy is dull to start off with. Getting an emotional arousal out of someone. We see this in academic literature. If you're in a heightened emotional state, you build more memory encoding. So you build more memories. However, when you move that on and look at Thinking Fast and Slow, I've forgotten his name, who wrote that and won the Nobel Prize, Daniel Kahneman.
Yeah.
Humans operate through heuristics. If something's familiar, comes to mind, and feels good, that essentially affects our behavior for years to come. So yes, any emotion is good at driving the short-term effects that we find in all our data. But if you leave positive emotion and leave people feeling more positive by the end of the ad, you're building positive memories that actually change future behavior for more years. So at System One, all the data we've seen with all our partners, IPA, Effie, and all our kind of media partners, the negative emotion and getting anyone to feel anything will kind of change behavior over a few weeks and months. But if you want to build brands long term, the affect heuristic really means that we should be building a positive brand, and we see that across categories. We'll also get a few people kicking off at your 7 DBAs advice and how can this possibly be for various media channels. I think this is a complicated thing for marketers now. 10 years ago, your job was to make a 30-second TV ad. You'd reach everyone, 90% of the population in a week. Job done. You'd call your customer team. You maybe take it below the line. Now we have to operate across loads of channels. So we work with JCDecaux to understand how we can do it in out of home. And we've created some research that's on the System One website, launching this week, called Double Take. How do you do it in short form? Marketers and creators need to understand how do we do that. And we've got some great research with TikTok on our website. How to do that in radio? It's very different. We've got research with Radio Center proving this.
Yeah, but I think, Doug, I know you've got great data on this, but I think you're kind of wussing out on this one, right? A little bit, right? Is it not true that one of the reasons a 30-second TVC remains a very powerful media force is it gives you 30 seconds to deliver 7 distinctive brand assets to the audience, right?
True. Yeah, but that's why we see TV still working on non-skippable formats, right? Higher attention means normally higher results. But all I'm saying is these days marketers have a harder job, and the best creators and marketers need to understand how each media channel works and how do we create in that format. Right, team, that is it. We've managed to not offend everyone, Mark, so that's good.
I can have a go. We've got a minute left. I can have a good old go.
No, all good. We're going to wrap up here. We'll send out the full Creative Dividend early look at the research and a link to Mark's mini MBA because a few people missed the QR code. We're releasing the publication in January, the full one. And if anyone wants more of Mark's chat, as I said, John Evans and Mark sat down in this week's Uncensored CMO podcast. Go listen to that if you've really got another hour to spend with your day with Mark today. And thanks so much for spending this time with us, Mark. You can finally go to bed. Thanks very much.